Irresponsible is a word I see thrown around casually a lot when talking about modern day film criticism, but how do we navigate when some people find a film to be irresponsible and other people find it to be revolutionary? Movies do not exist in isolation.
I was just blinded by the balls on that kid.
That is as true when we're talking about who has made them, what is happening in the world around the time that they release that shapes our opinion about what the movie is about, and those opinions multiply as the diversity of film criticism grows as more and more eyes get a view of that sweet, beautiful movie magic. Sometimes we can all agree that a movie is examining a social issue or providing some form of commentary, but we disagree on the success of that message and if a movie accidentally becomes problematic in the process, like one battle after another. Sometimes a message resonates in such a universally specific way, but we wonder about its importance or impact because of the intentions of the filmmaker, like in Superman. Sometimes we're in complete disagreement over what the message of a movie is, creating a polarizing dichotomy when speaking about a film and often creating division within the film community due to our personal offense if somebody has a different opinion, like with Eddington. We can even question if a person was the right person to direct a film, like some Indigenous and Native American critics of Killers of the Flower Moon said about Martin Scorsese, or even some black female critics said about Luca Guadagnino directing After the Hunt. I have seen in internet circles the phenomenon of a film being well received amongst critics during a film's festival run or early screenings, even across the board with non-white and trans critics, but then the general public runs wild with one notable person's interpretation of a film online, and then all of a sudden this film's perception is just shifted overnight. Not speaking over anybody specifically, I remember this also happening with Longlegs, and specifically trans women attacking other trans women for enjoying or even loving the film. Controversy in film is not new. People being offended by movies is not new either, but in the age of the internet, as time goes on, access increases to film. We can gain access to more ideas than ever before, and I can't change your mind on a film, whether that's liking it, and especially if you're offended by it, everybody has that right to. And I also notice people forming their own opinions entirely off of the opinions of others online without ever having seen a movie before or having their own verbiage, and that's a huge issue too. But even if you or I don't end up in the same place interpreting a film or even liking a film, we should still ask the question, when is a movie irresponsible and when is a movie revolutionary? My name is James, this is Movie Good or Movie Bad, and I'm sure people are very normal about this video already. We're really going to speak specifically about 3 different movies today, One Battle After Another, Superman, and Eddington, as well as talk about a number of other movies, including Killers of the Flower Moon. Specifically, what is the major praise and critique for each film? Going further into the question, does the intention of the filmmaker matter or does the art matter more itself? And also at the same time, who gets to be the most offended? Who is the most right in their opinion about a movie? I feel like really the most important question within this film, can a movie ever really be revolutionary inside the Hollywood system, whether we're talking about a blockbuster or an indie film? If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell, and I get the question all the time, why don't you have more subscribers? And that does shock me too, considering I release high quality video essays every week or so that don't require any kind of generative text in order to write them. I write them all myself. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to edit everything, and I hope it shows. Without further ado, let's talk about some movies from 2025, and yes, there will be some spoilers talking about these films. While I released a larger video about Eddington that's available on my page that came out around the time the movie came out, which you should really see if you do want to engage in a larger discussion about the film, there were many people who did not like the film, period. Finding it to be Ari Aster's film that seems to be the most sprawling and least focused, also coming to believe that the film means nothing, while others believe it tackles far too many topics to be effective, and a third group of people, including myself, viewing the film as one of the most accurate to understanding the world in the way that America has been shaped since 2020 and since COVID-19, the pandemic, the shutdowns, and also all the events that have followed. But regardless, some people have also questioned Ari Aster's integrity and ability to meaningfully tell stories with people of color, or especially black characters, with the black police officer in the film being paramount to this, or separately when talking about the presence of a homeless man who was killed by Joe Cross in the film, being especially upsetting to a number of viewers. Also can't speak about the film without speaking to the presence of the Black Lives Matter protests within the film, and the number of absurd figures that make up that protest, making some upset at Ari Aster and what he was potentially trying to say about Black Lives Matter. It made people think about if these characters were being framed as accessories or set dressing rather than being three-dimensional characters, and that also made people question who Aster was as a person, which has come up with nearly every single film he's made, and has also made people wonder if the film could have been a lot more fruitful if it was focused on the perspective of a person of color, or Pedro Pascal's character, in order to not sit with someone as unlikable as Joe Cross. A character that is clearly pathetic, very human, and also conservative, yet some critics also wanted a very specific MAGA analog in the film, and wasn't that also Joe Cross's character? Whether you hate the film or you're offended by it, again, I can't change your opinion, nor do I want to quiet the voices of black critics who were offended, but Eddington was also one of my favorite films of the year. I think that's because I viewed the film through the lens of a white man making a movie about white people, and their place within political movements and their relationship to people of color, which is a necessary viewpoint in the broad scope of the film. I also think this is a film speaking about the ulterior motives of white people, even those who may be aligned with you politically, such as Pedro Pascal's character secretly being an awful person who is receiving money to push for the AI data center, or the young man who wanted to pursue a white woman who was heavily involved in the Black Lives Matter protest, but then he started grifting as a liberal and then became conservative far later in the film. And as upsetting as that is to see, this says nothing about BLM as a movement. It says everything about white people inside those movements and political organizations, which is a conversation that happens time and time again in political organizing, but I also think people don't like to confront that people who share their views may also do so in such a shallow way. It's also weird to mention Superman in this video, which I think is a film excited many people going into the beginning of a new DC universe, appearing to be an antidote for Marvel fatigue for people who still wanted more superheroes, and although chewing off way too much, having a strong cast and message that inspired a lot of hope for people as a whole, which is quintessential for the character of Superman, and also made many emotional due to superheroes coming to save the day when Baravia attempted to invade Jarhanpur, which many people say is analogous to Israel occupying and invading Palestine. It's an interpretation that many had watching the film, both Zionist and anti-Zionist alike, and drew clear parallels that were hard to ignore because of their place in a superhero film, and also due to anybody being aware of Palestinian resistance over the years, maybe recognizing some of the images that are evoked within the film being based off the 2018 Gaza border protest. Many anti-Zionists found themselves empowered by the film. Many Zionists and Israelis found themselves as the Baravians, which says a lot about Zionism, but many people understandably began to interrogate, what does James Gunn think about the immediate parallel that people have picked up on? What are his politics as a person? And is this some form of appropriation in a major Hollywood film of imagery that you see and I see as political, but has no meaning in the film itself? Well, to start off, us as an audience reading this film near universally says a lot about the movie. Two, I think it's hard to do any of this accidentally, even if it leads us questioning if James Gunn did any of this on his own, or he did this for a quick buck, or if he even believes any of this. But also, why do we assume directors and writers are so stupid? James Gunn is a man who has been deeply political online. It's also what led to his firing from Guardians of the Galaxy 3, because of people pretending to be offended at a poor joke, and now Snyder cultists and conservatives get to have the same villain. It's very clear to see that as soon as he was rehired back from Disney and also got his job at DC Comics, he's been a lot more quiet online. Well, just about politics, he's still very much online. And even zooming out a little, it's hard to ignore James Gunn being one of the late creators involved in Troma Entertainment, the low-budget B-movie production company and distributor involved in making some of the most schlocky horror comedies that are pretty upsetting at times, sometimes poorly aged, but definitely punk just for existing. People have grown in familiarity with the Toxic Avenger, but they also made Class of Nukem High, Sergeant Kabuki Man NYPD, and Romeo and Juliet, which is also James Gunn's first feature film writing credit. And even if you think about these films being far less radical in the current context politically, and also just being radical in the sense of form or how they're released, if you think about that same spirit being in the present day, it could be why James Gunn has made a DC universe that is so political as a whole. The Suicide Squad uncovers that the United States was responsible for experiments being done on Starro and creates clear parallels with other moments of US intervention in other countries. Superman reckons with a Superman being framed as an American hero when he is attempting to save the people of the world and has clearly recognized everything as a case of right or wrong. He does not think about the politics of saving people. And the newest season of Peacemaker has dealt heavily with government oversight. I'm not trying to say that James Gunn is some staunch anti-Zionist. He is a white man in his mid-50s that expressed ideas similar to those on the left. Like, he critiques the government in a way that would make most white liberals in his age group, the vote for Obama 3-timers, pretty uncomfortable, but we could also be interpreting this series of scenes differently than James Gunn ever intended. There was also a fair interpretation of Superman being about Ukraine and Russia in this analog, which while I can see, Palestine and Israel do feel more present to me when looking at the film and others when looking at the film, and regardless of James Gunn's intent, people took a powerful message from the film and we can't ignore that. And the most recent of this bunch of films is One Battle After Another, easily the most expensive film that Paul Thomas Anderson will ever make, a film touching on the multi-generational battle against the government and the greater powers that be that are hidden in the shadows and really underneath it all, a film about a man man who's never been engaged in the revolution as he should, having a daughter who is now navigating this new world, and also, like Eddington, a movie about white people, specifically men, and their relationship to political movements. Whether we think about Ghetto Pat being a member of the French 75, or Lockjaw's involvement in the military, and the events of the film being set off because of his fears of having a biracial child affecting his ability to get into the white supremacist underground group, the Christmas Adventurers, and leads to the town of Bacton Cross being attacked by the military with these large-scale immigration raids taking place, which is all a guise to get Willa. Thinking about One Battle After Another and the critiques against it, it's funny what's being said and how comparable it all feels to Eddington, which in this case we're mostly focusing on the place of black women in the film, with some black critics comparing the film's black female characters to caricature and blaxploitation, or existing as the Jezebel stereotype, which I can't speak on as an authority. Really, this is not my conversation to have, at least for that part of the film, but also critiquing Tiana Taylor's Perfidia's relationship to the French 75 and Lockjaw, as well as what PTA was trying to say about political movements when thinking about the failures of the French 75, or how they're notably an organization with guns, and how their success compared to that to Benicio del Toro's Sensei and his efforts to save those from the militarized forces in Bacton Cross. I want to be very careful about my words here, considering I'm not a black woman, and not to be too repetitive. I really can't speak for the offense that some have felt. You can completely feel that offense. I'm not here to change your mind. This is just my interpretation of the text as an Asian person. But one, I also feel like this is a film firmly about whiteness and its connection to people of color, which is pretty autobiographical, speaking to PTA's marriage to Maya Rudolph, with even some of the dialogue about Ghetto Pat being unable to do his daughter's hair after raising her alone, being lifted directly from conversations about Maya Rudolph's father being unable to do the same. I think that maybe speaking as someone with a white father, and to be clear, I am not saying anything about you, Dad. This is not about you if you're watching this. Just sharing my stake in this race. More white people need to talk about the relationship that they have to people of color within their families. I'm uniting all the biracials in the world with this statement, even you, Drake. Going back to the issues that some have around blackness in the film, I think aside from maybe narrative critiques, those issues seem to be framed around the characters of Jungle Pussy and Perfidia. Specifically the hypersexualization of both of these characters, and I feel like addressing the former is a lot easier. Jungle Pussy is not just a character within the film, she is also an actress and a rapper who shares that same name, with a key catchphrase of hers being "This pussy don't pop for you," being part of the Jungle Pussy song Pop For You, and a phrase that she has proudly claimed on stage for years and years and years, especially since the film has been released. And why are we ignoring her contributions to the character? I think we can still critique the character, we can still critique the relationship of blackness in the film, we still recognize that PTA directed and wrote the film, but there are black women who contribute to these characters. Nothing exists in isolation. I'm not saying that you can't critique them either. That's not a conversation for me to have either. But still, we need to look at all of this. And moving on to Perfidia, most of the issue that I've noticed is about her connection and sexual relationship to Lockjaw, and the fact that her actions led to the failure of the French 75, at least in the extended opening of the film. To this, I would say that many people misread Lockjaw's objectification of Perfidia as PTA's, which is insane to think that every character is pushing the values or thoughts of a writer or director, and also that some of you are prudes, and also clearly Perfidia sleeps with him in order to save her friends in the French 75, and while she may get off to that power dynamic and the power she has over Lockjaw, she clearly doesn't care for him much. That's also why she ran away. And when she shoots the police officer during the bank robbery, we also never see the altercation that takes place. We never understand the conversation that happens. It is up to you as an audience to project on what exactly happened to make everything implode. Was it on Perfidia? Was it on the cop? Was it on something completely different? And it's up to you as the audience to project your stuff onto that and your own perception of what exactly happened there. And some of your interpretations might actually say more about you than her. My question for the audience here is, why does any of this have to say anything about a generalization of black women or political movement? Can't the scenes that we see in a film speak to a specific moment and an individual who made a mistake? Why do black women or movements have to be perfect in the context of this film? Nothing is being said about who has guns or who is trying to make change, but I think a lot is being said about the change we're still trying to make and how important that is, despite the world maybe not having changed as much as we would have liked. Not a film that I'd initially thought of for this video due to it not being a recent release, but I don't want to annoy people who clicked on the video for Lily Gladstone. I think it's fair to name Martin Scorsese's involvement in Killers of the Flower Moon in the same breath as some of these other movies. Sitting with the film, I experienced it as one that captures the horrors of the Osage people in Oklahoma as they are systematically executed by the white men they let into their community, but there were again Indigenous and Native American critics who wondered, should Martin Scorsese be the one to tell this story? Although the original book the film was based off of of is a nonfiction film. Several people I've spoken to view it as a whodunit novel, and within it is a mystery that's final result is not all that shocking considering a historical perspective, but the surprise is drained from Scorsese's film as he focuses on Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro's two characters and their evil schemes. And while there's an argument about who should direct this film, and there are a number of indigenous directors who are active and deserve much larger scale roles, I also recognize the structure of the current film industry doesn't allow for anybody other than a Martin Scorsese level director to direct a $200 million film, unless we're talking about an MCU movie. The film was only allowed to be of that scale because it was Marty making the film and Marty was on the project, and by focusing on the perspective of a white man in the film, he ultimately makes the most tasteful film that he could, even if you have strong thoughts about the characterization of the Osage people in the film or the lingering on violence that takes place. If you look at the original narrative of that book, it is centered on the FBI coming to the Osage people and helping to understand the atrocities that have taken place. Scorsese's reshaping of the narrative to Ernest Burkhart helps allow us to spend more time with the Osage people and also allowed for many more indigenous actors, including Lily Gladstone, to take much more of a center stage. It's also well documented at this point that the number of indigenous people brought on to make this film and the fact that it was allowed to be made in Oklahoma at this scale, again, speaks to the pull that Martin Scorsese had when making the project. It's also been made very clear that he was open to criticism and that criticism is valuable even after the picture is locked and the movie's completed and you have people who worked on the film critiquing it at the red carpet. I said earlier I wasn't trying to change anybody's mind and I still stand by that, but regardless of what you think about the films I said before, some people love them, some people hate them, but I also have to ask the question, does any of it really matter? I think we can spend all day breaking down if art is morally good or bad depending on which movie or TV show we're talking about, but at the same time, isn't how we engage with that art much more important? I'm actually thinking back to a conversation that I had in college during a class about race. We were discussing the concept of satire, and a bold statement made by my professor at the time was that satire as a whole was irresponsible, and we should not engage with it because people don't know any better. I think we were specifically talking about the 1970s sitcom All in the Family. And to give credit, I could be easily misunderstanding or misremembering the context of the conversation, but I also can't agree with any of this to any extent.
I disagree. I disagree.
Satire is clearly important. It helps us find humor in the ridiculousness of prejudice, not to ever take it lightly, but to think about how stupid racism, sexism, and transphobia, as well as other evils of the world are, and most importantly with my point, anybody can make an awful point about a great piece of art. I had a follower online firmly say that Past Lives promoted domestic spousal abuse because Arthur tried to learn Korean in order to understand Greta Lee's dreams, instead of finding that endearing trying to understand the language that your spouse grew up with and shortening the language gap in your home. I've also seen people say that 28 years later is a bad movie, and also that spending time with Aaron Taylor Johnson's character is irresponsible because he is a bad dad. And while I do think he's a cheating bum, while I don't think he's a great person, he's also not the worst person on the planet, and there are many qualities that he has that are admirable in a dad, but he's just human, not ignoring everything that he's done, of course. People think that Oppenheimer is very pro-bomb because he's so gung-ho about making the thing, but this is also a movie very critical of the man and his actions and the deaths that he caused from the dropping of the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I also think there's plenty of times where you can flip this example and concept and send the idea of someone profoundly evil or even questionable making a film that many people recognize to be a good film. I'll be speaking at this more in length as a topic in the near future, but I recently for October got the chance to sit down and watch Roman Polanski's feature film, Repulsion. If you don't know because you've understandably avoided his works, Repulsion is a wildly surreal film following the life of a woman with androphobia or the fear of engaging or interacting with men, and begins to hallucinate after her sister and her boyfriend go on vacation. It's a film that many people have interpreted as feminist, and despite the graphic violence present within the film, one that many people have found cathartic when exploring and feeling seen about their own pain previously being assaulted. But for Roman Polanski, from everything they shared about the film, he just thought it was a fun little film where he got to pick on a woman with schizophrenia, seemingly having little idea about the impact the film would have or make on people, and also deeply possible and likely that his own experiences causing harm to women shaped his ability to make a film like Repulsion. Jumping to another controversial film, I'm very alone as an Asian American person loving Apocalypse Now, a film that brutally frames the United States and its military in a horrendous and critical way for me, and also a film that I understand has upset many people that I personally know, especially considering Francis Francis Ford Coppola's comments about the Vietnam War and the Vietnam people that have understandably left a bad taste in the mouth of many. When Kevin E.G. Perry for The Guardian interviewed Coppola in 2019, he said what is considered to be avant-garde in one moment 20 years later is used for wallpaper and becomes part of the culture. It seems that's what happened with Apocalypse. He also said no one wants to make a pro-war film, everyone wants to make an anti-war film, but an anti-war film I always thought should be like Kon Ichikawa's post-Second World War drama, The Burmese Harp, something filled with love and peace and tranquility and happiness. It shouldn't have sequences of violence that inspire a lust for violence. Apocalypse Now has stirring scenes of helicopters attacking innocent people. That's not anti-war. He then counters, I always thought the perfect anti-war film would be a story in Iraq about a family who are going to have their daughter be married, and different relatives were going to come to the wedding, the people managed to come, maybe there'd be some dangers, but then no one would get blown up, no one would get hurt, they would dance at the wedding. That would be an anti-war film. An anti-war film cannot glorify war, and Apocalypse Now arguably does. Certain sequences have been used to rev up people to be warlike. He also said, I don't feel guilty because I know my role in the whole process, and I think regardless of these much more recent comments or past comments who Francis Ford Coppola is as a person, are grappling with the question, is a film anti-war or pro-war? Maybe there is no such thing as an anti-war film, but clearly some of us view the film through both lenses, and that dichotomy will exist for the rest of time, as long as we view films and understand that art speaks to us so differently. Not moving too quick past the fact that we also engage with and interpret films in so many ways, what do we do when someone is offended when speaking to a film? Whose opinion gets to be the most right? And there are no clear answers to any of this. Obviously, we can interpret film in multitudes. We can be friends with people who dislike the films that we like and vice versa. We can have a stronger takeaway about one theme compared to another individual about another theme for the same movie, and they can both be right. We can dislike and like different things about the same movie, and maybe the most controversial point that I have to make in this film is that some people are going to be offended by some movies I love or vice versa, and I also can't take away from someone disliking a movie or being offended by it, regardless if it's just their brief opinion or several page rant or essay. Certainly there is more for me to sit with when someone gives me more or shares more of their critique or response versus someone saying that they just didn't like the film. I also take those former responses a lot more seriously and give them a lot more time because of it. A follower of mine who had not seen one battle after another developed strong thoughts about it after having seen another creator's video about the film, and despite this video being several minutes long after being sent to me, I kind of determined that they just didn't like the movie, and sure, they had issues with it, they felt very uncomfortable about the representation of black women, but they said it made them feel funny and they couldn't elaborate on it more than that. And the same kind of thing was going on in the comment section. And again, I can't shut people down, it's not your fault if you don't have the verbiage, but at the same time there also has to be a much thorough discussion about why we dislike a film. Do you ever wonder when you're watching a film if you feel offended? That's the objective of the filmmaker. Sure, you have the feelings that you do have, but do you ever question why you have the feelings that you have about a movie? It's a question that is so key to my film analysis, and I think about this across the board. It's a question that I think more people should think of more often. And going back to the original question, I do think if a demographic group is the focus of commentary in a film, I do think they have ownership over a bit of that critique, but we should also recognize that people don't exist in monoliths. There are Asian people that don't like Everything Everywhere All at Once or Past Lives. There are black people who dislike and love One Battle After Another in Eddington. There are trans women who love and don't love Longlegs, although there are many people who've broken down the fact that Longlegs is based off an 80s glam rocker. There's some people who firmly say, no, it's irresponsible because he made me think of a trans woman, and there's a lot to break down within that. Someone enjoying a movie that we find to be problematic or bad doesn't inherently make them a bad person. It's not like they're going out of their way to defend slavery after watching Gone with the Wind or Birth of a Nation. You know, that's the case where you can shut somebody down, but most of the case someone has taken something very different from a movie, and it's okay to sit in that. For me, I think it's impossible to address any of this without exploring also one of the more existential questions I see from anyone who ventures into filmmaking themselves, or whenever anyone really uncovers where funding comes from in filmmaking, but can we actually make a revolutionary film at all with the current Hollywood system, even at a smaller scale? Thinking of the big five film studios, Disney, Warner Brothers, Sony, Paramount, and Universal, despite our love for some of the films that they've technically released, we can also recognize that these are billion-dollar companies with so much money coming from so many different sources as time goes on, that there is no expectation that all of it is clean money. And I even made a recent video talking about this, but in the world of smaller film studios, even A24 and Mubi have become multi-billion-dollar companies. A24 is valued at $3 billion, and Mubi is valued at $1 billion, and has also received money from Sequoia Capital starting in May 2025, a capital investment firm that's also invested in Israeli military tech as of, I believe, like January 2024, something in that, at least in that time range, and that's also led to a boycott on Mubi. And spelling all that out, I haven't even mentioned that Len Blavinik, who owns Access Entertainment, is a known investor guester on many of A24's films, and he is a loud and proud Zionist. What does that mean for films like The Zone of Interest, which speak to the horrors of being underneath occupation and having your oppressors and killers live next door to you or beside you, or in the case of The Brutalist, speaks directly about the state of Israel and how the United States is complicit in its creation and are complicit in the actions of Israel in the past, present, and future? What does it mean for the art and its meaning if some of the money used to make it came from a questionable source? Does knowing where the money came from for I Saw the TV Glow make it any less revolutionary of a text to engage with when talking about transness? How to Blow Up a Pipeline stares into the lives of eco-terrorists who are trying to make real and radical change, and while there are many who've come out and spoken out about this maybe not being the most ideal action to take, I would argue that regardless of who funded a movie, it's important that art calls on us to take radical action. We could say the same about Sorry to Bother You, a film that, while a hilarious satire and whose call to action hit way less hard on a recent rewatch for me, can still get people riled up and want to make change regardless if that film was made underneath a studio like Focus Features, which is underneath Universal Studios. I'm not denying that we should have critiques about art or where the money comes from, or saying that we shouldn't try to do better. We should always try to do better. Sometimes we just have to take what we can with the art and try to engage with its simultaneous beauty and filth, and maybe our interpretation of the art was far more revolutionary than the film itself. Some may see all this and say, James, these movies aren't revolutionary, they're meaningful representation, they push great ideas, but they're not revolutionary at all. They were still made within these systems, and I have to say, yeah, I kind of agree here. It is near impossible to make a film that is radical within the major film studio system, and when people have done so before in the past, it's always ended with the film being pulled and typically the end of the filmmaker in charge of bringing the film to life. Not a conclusive list by any means, but upon doing as much research as I could, I only came across 3 different films made within the Hollywood system that were so controversial to studio executives because of their subject matter that I would say that they qualify to be placed within this category. The first was the 1973 film The Blank Who Sat by the Door, directed by Ivan Dixon. I can't say the title here because it is indeed a slur. Some people have said, James, this also refers to spies in the film. I don't care. It's still a slur. It means both things. I shouldn't say that word. The second of these films was 1987's Walker, directed by Alex Cox, and the third is 1998's Bulworth, directed by Warren Beatty. I'm not saying that you have to find these films perfect or find them the most meaningful to you, but in each of their cases, they were such a searing critique of the US government made within the major studio system. For the 1973 film that I mentioned before, it's a film that is both a satire of the civil rights movement of the late 60s and is a serious call to action for arms for Black people in the country to be organized and continue to push back against the US government after the progress of the civil rights movement. In the film's narrative, we see the CIA attempt to have their first Black recruits in order to gain the trust of African Americans in the country, and it leads to one Black recruit making it through their recruitment process before he begins to use these same techniques to train the Black community to push back against the CIA. It's clear why the government was upset about this film just off of hearing the synopsis, and while the film is incredible to me now and feels so timely despite being over 50 years old, it's also a movie that, while received well, was financially doing well, was pulled from theaters due to the FBI's involvement, and was only available for years under bootleg. Wait, that wasn't real? There was a rumor that was spread, including by the filmmaker, in order to increase the infamy of the film, and it had regular drive-in and theater screenings, with the director even being there until 1984? But regardless, it's notable how Ivan Dixon didn't have more notable of a career as a director, and there was no physical media release until a negative was discovered in 2004, lawsuit being filed underneath another name and leading to a temporary DVD release that year. The film has been long out of print, but bootlegs continue to be available online, and Ivan Dixon's daughter has been promoting the film through a theatrical tour, has promised the film of getting a physical media release in the near future, which I cannot wait for people to engage with the film when it's much more readily available. The next film of this bunch was Walker, a 1987 weird western, or a western that wasn't afraid to defy its genre in order to provide some sort of comedy or oddness or play with the conventions that you or I expect. It's a film about William Walker, an American filibuster who'd call upon manifest destiny in order to justify his efforts of traveling down to Mexico and Central America in order to evade their land, and in the process make himself president of Nicaragua. And this all led Alex Cox to film Walker in Nicaragua during the Contra War, while the CIA was intervening down there in the way that they always do, and leads to the film that draws powerful parallels between the past and the present in US intervention. It's an amazing film that, while it is much more regarded now since its release in the Criterion Collection, it was a film that had a sabotaged theatrical release and led to Alex Cox being blacklisted as a filmmaker in the United States, with his last offer to direct a Hollywood film being The Running Man, but then having that offer rescinded once knowledge of Walker was much more widely known across Hollywood. After this, Alex Cox would have 3 distinct periods of activity in his career, one where he was making making films in Mexico, another where he made all of his films in the UK, and another where he was making micro-budget films in the US, but he was never again asked to direct a major feature film for the Hollywood system again. What a legend to sabotage your career like this and have a full career afterwards. And the final of these films was Bulworth, the 1998 film directed by Warren Beatty, and a parody film that features a Californian Democratic senator who's grown much more conservative as he's taken more corporate money, and now plans to have himself assassinated in order to give his daughter his life insurance money. It's a film that is primarily a rom-com and features multiple scenes where the main character is just rapping at other characters, and while very, very funny, is also a film that touches on race, the commercialization of politics, and names challenges within the American healthcare system that feels so bold. And while personally not as bold as the previous films I mentioned, and also a film that almost broke even at the box office and even got a nomination at the Oscars for Best Original Script, it also still led to Warren Beatty not receiving another acting job until the 2001 film Town and Country, before directing again nearly 20 years later in 2016 with the film Rules Don't Apply. And for everyone at home, you most likely know the man who very recently was on stage announcing Best Picture at the Oscars when he accidentally called La La Land as the Best Picture winner when Moonlight had indeed won, and then he and his onstage partner and Bonnie and Clyde co-star Faye Dunaway would get to announce The Shape of Water as the Best Picture winner next year without a single hitch. I've thrown a lot at all of you, and you still might be wondering, James, when is a movie irresponsible? When is it revolutionary? And sure, to answer this, we have to think about the context of the film, how it was made, and also more importantly, ask yourself, how did the film resonate for you? Because that's what determines the answer for you. Many people I know have found great meaning in offensive works. I personally think the sci-fi film The Creator speaks to a very specific experience that I've seen with how America has provided so much harm to the people of Southeast Asia. And many people who are also Southeast Asian find that film offensive because of the same reasons I love the film, which is completely okay. There is no definitive interpretation. There is only your interpretation. Some films are radical and revolutionary in context, even if we question their place as propaganda, where we may be talking about a film like Battleship Potemkin or I Am Cuba or The Cranes Are Flying, because maybe we align with the anti-authoritarian or anti-war or pro-workers' rights sentiments in the film, and there's a bit of propaganda at the end, and that's okay, we kind of deal with that. Sometimes a film can be radical to us even if it was made in the United States, whether we talk about One Battle After Another or Superman or Eddington, regardless of who made them or what scale or what the intention of the filmmakers was, and that's okay if they gave us the courage to do better. Sometimes we get a lot from really tiny films like the 80s film Born in Flames that is also a radical piece of feminist film that never got the eyes it deserved because many people tried to suppress its message or it was inaccessible for so long, and why would we fault someone else for getting a similar message for a work in a similar vein, even if it is bigger or less direct or as radical? It is also important to think about films in their context, like films with queer representation being so bold for merely existing, and sometimes getting banned or censored in their countries, such as Farewell My Concubine in China, or Rafiki in Kenya, or Chess of the Wind in Iran. And regardless of your enjoyment or their impact on you, they are instantly more revolutionary than most films made within the United States for virtue of existing. So yes, it is important to keep perspective when talking about these films. They may not be nearly as revolutionary as we think when a ton of money is being thrown at them, or these big studios are heavily filtering and censoring any radical or progressive ideas. I mean, the big message at the end of Barbie was just vote, and I still consider that movie being feminist. And I also can't control what you take away from this art, and if a film calls to you to make radical change, who am I to stop you? Because at least you're engaging with art in a meaningful way and aren't just viewing it as mindless entertainment. I already hinted at this before in the video, but this video is getting a part 2 or a spiritual successor in a very different vein very soon. Think the 2nd or 3rd week of November. But if you want to see that, subscribe, hit that bell if you enjoyed this, like, comment, please share what you learned down below or what you disagreed with or agreed with or whatever. Just keep the conversation going. I'm very excited that I get to start Halloween coverage next week in a very delayed way. I have a very fun video planned. I hope you'll enjoy it. I hope you'll enjoy what's next. Check out some other videos if you're still here. You've got some more time. I would really appreciate it. And thank you all. Take care. This is James, and see you next time.